Okay, I've been trying to get this video done for a while now, so we'll try to get on with it and show you how it all works. So this all started when I was trying out cyanotype on glass, and that process taught me some very important fundamentals to get to this stage. But I didn't like the fact you're pretty much stuck with blue only. I did try some bleaching and toning without bleaching with glass plates, but really all I ended up with was a lot of destroyed glass plate images. I did find some ways to use hardeners with the gelatin, etc. It was just too complicated. It did not produce a good image, and you can't really control the color unless you just want blue, which may be fine for you, but that wasn't what I was looking for. So I happened across a video after I did the glass cyanotype, and I'll post a video, or I'll put a link to the video where I started with the glass cyanotype. Again, it teaches you some really important fundamentals. But then I ran across a video by Top Sheet Photography, and I'm not going to say his name because I can't I couldn't pronounce it to save my life. But he does carbon printing, and he has a unique process where he mixed the dichromate into the tissue when he's making the chemistry for it. So that made me think, well, I wonder if I could use that in combination with the process for the glass cyanotype, and it turns out it worked really well. I had to do some adjustments on the recipe, but it worked. It did exactly what I wanted to, and so that's what this is all about. Okay, so step one with anything to do with glass, whether you're making dry plates, wet plates, any of this, is to wash the glass. I just scrub it with soapy water with a mild scrubber, nothing too harsh. You just scrub it down with soapy water. Make sure you get anything off of it, oils, etc. Then I rinse everything really, really good. Just with hot tap water to make sure any residues are gone and all that. Now, because of the area I live, the water's very hard, so here you're going to see me rinsing everything off with distilled water, and that's just to get any deposits out of it so that when it dries it doesn't have any spots or anything on it. So all I do is scrub it with soap and water, rinse it really good, rinse it with distilled water, and then I let it all sit and dry until I can get the next step done. Okay, the next step is to place your clean glass down on a flat surface. I'm using these they're old floor tiles because they cool it down and make the glop, as it's called, set a little faster once it's poured. In this case, I was testing out some glass, some acetate, and some little thin pieces of plexiglass. The two little squares you see, what I do is I'll make a few little square pieces of glass so that I can do exposure tests before I make the main print. But so yeah, see, I'm doing acetate sheets. That I'm actually doing for another project. I'm using it to make just a tissue, but it would work either way. So you can use glass, acetate, plexiglass, acrylic, whatever you can find that's transparent. I found these, they're plexiglass sheets, but they're very thin and flexible. So I tested it out on this project. But you just you peel whatever, if there's protective coating on the plexiglass. I didn't wash it because I figured it would be alright, but just make sure your glass or whatever's dry and then lay it on your surface. Be sure it's level, and then we'll get on to the next step. Okay, so first thing you got to do is let your gelatin swell. So I go ahead and put my double boiler together. It's just a quart jar and an old pan. So you put your water inside of it, cold water. You don't ever use warm for gelatin. Add your gelatin, and I let it sit and soak up while I'm measuring out all my other ingredients, but it's all sitting there in the pan, so it's ready to go. So all I have to do is turn the heat on when I'm ready to mix the rest of my ingredients up. You need a fairly sensitive scale. I got this on eBay for like 20 bucks because it's 2 decimal places. The first thing I'm measuring out is the sugar, and I'll have all the ingredients listed. Don't pay too much attention to the amounts you see on the scales. They'll vary slightly, but I'll have the recipe in the description. I'm also, with the sodium hydroxide and the dichromate, I'm adding a little water so that it's not in the air. You can't aspirate it. At least it's in a liquid form, so it's less dangerous. Still dangerous, but you add water to it, then it's not in a powder form anymore, so it's a little less dangerous. Still need to treat it with care. Use like a face mask and goggles and gloves, etc. when handling it. But the gelatin swells and soaks up the water while I'm measuring all this stuff out. It usually takes me at least 15 minutes to get prepped. I'm using double the ink that was in the original creator's recipe. Because of this method, it requires twice the ink. That's about the only major difference. And here's where I'm actually turning the heat on and getting everything ready to mix up. Once it's just steaming, that's all you need. You don't need it to be boiling, because it just doesn't need to be that hot. But I get it to the right temperature, just enough to melt the gelatin. Make sure the gelatin is melted really well. Just make sure it looks completely clear before you start adding into the other ingredients in. When you're adding the sodium hydroxide and dichromates, I always pour some of the solution back into it to mix it up, because it's just such a small amount, just to get it out of there. But mix in the sugar, the hydroxide, the dichromate, and then the ink, and make sure it's all stirred really well. Make sure it's mixed really, really well. Make sure everything's dissolved really, really well. And then you shouldn't have too many problems with it. And right after you add the ink and you make sure it's stirred really well, mixed in really good, then you can filter it, which is just done with, I had another beaker, and I just put a coffee filter with a rubber band to hold it together. And this is sped up pretty fast because it takes a while. What I would recommend is filter all of it and then set that beaker back in the hot water, just so it doesn't start solidifying on you. Also, when it's warmer, it has less of a chance to form bubbles, which is it's one of the biggest problems you can get with carbon printing. Bubbles just ruin everything, so avoid that at all possible. When you're pouring it on the glass, try not to agitate it too much so it doesn't make bubbles, and then just use a comb to spread it out on the plates or whatever you have. You do not have to put much on it. You just need enough to coat it to where when the light hits it from the other side that it will react with it. It does not have to be a very thick coating to work with this process. So get enough on there, use a comb to spread it out, and then you let it set up. So on this one I spilled a little bit off the one end, but yeah, just coat it with enough to make sure that it's completely covered, and also make sure it's on a level surface. I should have mentioned that before, but completely coat it, let it set up, which it won't take too long, and then you'll be on to the drying stage. Okay, so after it sets up, it needs to dry thoroughly. So when it sets up, it'll have the appearance of jelly, black jelly, but it needs to dry completely before it will work, which just means it's like there's no more moisture in it. It won't be tacky. Here's a couple pictures. You can tell when it's not done. You'll notice that there's like a sheen in an area, and that's the area that's not dry. So you need to make sure that it's completely dry before you go on with the exposure. If you mess up and spill it like I did, you can, after it's completely dry, you can take a warm cloth, a warm washcloth with plenty of water on it, carefully on the underside, the side that doesn't have any of the gelatin on it, and completely clean it off. That's kind of important anyway because you're exposing it from the opposite side, but if it does spill onto the other side, don't worry about it too much. Just clean it off really good, and once everything's completely set up and completely dried, then we can go on to the exposures. Okay, so now we're on to the exposure test strip. Make sure that the emulsion side is down on this, on the plate. Place the negative on it and then a piece of glass to hold it steady. I'm using a simple 80 watt UV lamp that you can get on Amazon, because that's the most common thing people are going to be able to have access to. And what I'm doing here is I'm just doing a test with the little piece of glass so I can see how long I need to expose the main piece for once I get to that stage. So this one I did for 15 minutes, and I covered a third of it every 5 minutes to see what it would come out to be. The key point here is that the emulsion is down, meaning the emulsion that you put on it and dried is on the bottom, so that the negative can expose from the top of it down, and the one side of the glass that's completely transparent down to the emulsion side, and that causes it not only to harden the gelatin, but it will adhere to the glass. Completely adhere to it. So this is just the initial test strip to see what my exposure times need to be. I usually do just 15 minutes because this particular lamp, that seems to be roughly the time anyway. So when you do your exposure test strip, take your piece of glass off and your negative, and then it will be time for the developing part of it. So the developing is basically just putting it in hot water. I'm using tap water, just hot tap water. I tried to get a reading just so you could see how hot it was. It's around 116 Fahrenheit. You just get a pan to hold enough of it so that it doesn't cool down too quickly. Put the plate in, emulsion side up, so that it doesn't get scratched off on the underside. It takes a little bit for it to rehydrate and just start to dissolve and melt. But what's happening here is all of the unexposed gelatin starts to dissolve off of it. So all of the hardened gelatin that had the image it'll be hardened and adhered to the glass, and the rest of it will dissolve away. Now this process is a little more resilient than you might imagine. Once you start really getting an image visible, you can actually run hot water on it to help dissolve the rest of it off. Just don't do it like let it splash way down on it where it'll start ripping it apart. But if you hold it up to the faucet, you can allow the hot water to rinse on it and gently wash the rest of the dissolving gelatin and ink mixture off. And once you've done your test strip, you'll have an idea about how long you want to do your main exposure. On this one, I decided to go 20 minutes after I saw the test, and then I'll show you us doing the main plank now. Okay, so the main plate was a 20-minute exposure. On this particular one, this is a glass plate, and I used the same negative I did on the test strip. I did a 20-minute exposure with the 80-watt UV light source. Then I developed it the same as the test plate. Run hot water, let it soak, get it to start dissolving, and then I usually end up always using the hot water from the sink to speed it along because I get impatient. But by the way, once you get to it's melting off, you can turn the lights on. It's no longer sensitive at that point. So but I rinse it off. The other thing I do though on the final one is I do rinse it off with distilled water because of the hardness of the water. The second one I'm doing is the transparent thin plexiglass. It's not even. It's so thin it's almost just like a piece of like a protector, like a sheet protector or something. But I wanted to see how it would do, and it actually did surprisingly well. But same process. That one was only exposed 10 minutes, and I wasn't quite happy with it. I should have done it longer. But same process. Rinse with distilled water, etc., so that you don't get spots on it. And once there's no ink running off of it, once there's no more anything dissolving off of it, you can then let everything sit and dry. And I would recommend just lay some paper towels or regular towel down and something to prop the glass up on. Make sure you have the emulsion facing out because it's still a little sensitive, so if you don't, you could scratch it off. So let it sit emulsion out to dry. You can use a fan or not, that's up to you at that point. And then and at that point everything is done and you can mount it or do whatever you want to do with it. Okay, so here's the final dried plate. And it looks kind of weird until you actually lay it. I mean, it's transparent, but until you lay it down on something, you can't quite see the image well. But I think it does a pretty good job. By the way, the negatives I'm using in this particular case are digital negatives. They're just printed out on transparency with an inkjet printer, nothing fancy. The light source, like I said, is an 80-watt UV. By the way, royal blue LEDs work better for carbon printing than anything I've ever tried, and I may have to make a video on that too. This is that plexiglass, and you can see it's underexposed, but still, I was happy with the result. It didn't do too bad. So if you don't like the idea of glass, you can use acrylic or plexiglass or whatever. I guess theoretically you could even do a bottle, like a glass bottle, if you could wrap the negative around it and expose it all the way around somehow. One cool thing about these is you can use gold foil on the back and do an ortone. That's one of my favorite ways of doing. Well, I think it'd be my favorite way for like fall trees. I'm going to try some pictures like that, but that's one of the cool advantages to this is you can change the background to get different results or different feels for it. So yep, that's the final images, at least for this little demonstration I was doing here anyway. I'm going to make a video on doing a full carbon transfer for making little bitty opal types, like from 35mm or 6x6 negatives. I did that as an experiment, and I had a lot of people ask about it, so I'm going to make a video on how I did that. A lot of the steps are similar to this, with the exception of you have to do the actual transfer. So I'll have to I'll have to show all that. I also have to work on. I'm still trying to get stuff together to do some shutter experiments. And there's a couple other projects I'm working on. A flash, flash that works specifically for like paper negatives and well, any orthochromatic film. But thank you all for watching, and I'm not sure which project will be next, but when I get the time, I will have another project up here soon. Thank you.